Hey everybody, this is Autoblog Podcast producer Eric here. I'm just hopping in quickly at the beginning of the episode to let you know that this episode of the Autoblog Podcast is brought to you by the SoFi Daily Podcast. Reaching financial independence starts with having the right information. So every weekday morning, SoFi keeps you up to date with important business news and stock market happenings and how they affect your financial life. So get your money right and search for SoFi, that's SOFI, wherever you get your podcasts. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is our news editor, Joel Stocksdale. What is up, man?
Hey, how's it going? I'm doing all right.
Good. Yeah, I'm pretty well. So we've got a great show for you today. Joel has spent some time in the brand new Chevy Tahoe. That's a very interesting, important vehicle, especially for Chevy. It's always been one of the sort of defining vehicles in that segment. So I'm curious to hear more about it. Joel also spent some time in a pretty wild F-150. He's going to explain to you what that is because it's me trying to intro it will do you no justice, but do check out the pictures and all that good stuff on Autoblog. We're going to run through some news. Lots of interesting news hits this week. Maserati's increasing the Trofeo. I would almost call it Trofeo for all, or almost everybody. The Ioniq is becoming a brand, if you will, within the Hyundai sort of company, which is interesting. It's an EV brand. We've got teasers for the BMW M3 Touring Wagon, sort of the auto journalist special. And staying with Hyundai, or going back to Hyundai, the Elantra N-Line is going to become a thing. I think it's interesting how Hyundai is really expanding the N-Line across its portfolio and really giving just more performance chops and sort of more stuff for us enthusiasts. Lastly, no spend my monies this week, but we've been going through all kinds of different segments, trivias. We did a beer segment, different things. And just kind of an interesting historical note about the role of the car in the 19th Amendment. So stick around for that. That'll be short and interesting. So, Chevy Tahoe. Joel, important vehicle. I'm intrigued sort of by the off-road versions. Those pictures look pretty good. Just take me through what's new for the new model year.
Yeah, so the Tahoe is completely redesigned for the 2021 model year, as is the Suburban, since they're pretty much linked hand in hand. One's the long version. And the big news is that it has finally gone to independent rear suspension, just like the Ford Expedition. And besides that, there are a couple other new features like powertrains. For the first time, the Tahoe will be available with a diesel. You can have it with the 3-liter inline-6 diesel from the Silverado, as well as the kind of legacy model 6.2-liter V8 and 5.3-liter V8 engines. And of course, 4-wheel drive or 2-wheel drive. Lots of suspension options. You can have it with just the plain old standard steel springs and fixed shocks, or you can have it with magnetic ride control like the previous Tahoe. And now there's also an air suspension option, which is what we had on our vehicle. Our test one was a 2021 Tahoe Z71, and it was kitted out with the air suspension and quite a few other little features here and there. Oh, and one of the other big things with Tahoe is that it has a completely new interior. They didn't just take the Silverado interior and drop it into this. They gave it its own all-new, unique interior that is actually a big upgrade over the previous one. Lots of nice materials. It's the one that we had. The dash was covered with leather and stuff and nice soft-touch plastics. They all come with a big, 10-inch touchscreen. That's a standard feature, and it's actually really nice. It's big, it's easy to read, it's easy to use. It's a nice place to be. The independent suspension helped add a lot of interior space, as well as the fact that the whole body is bigger. The rear seat legroom is actually the same as the Suburban now. And I was able to sit behind myself all the way back there in the third row seat. So like, I would have been comfortable in any position in that truck, which is pretty impressive.
Sounds pretty good. It looks like you tested the Z71 version, of course, in addition to some of those, suspension and performance enhancements you mentioned. I think it looks pretty cool. I think it's the coolest looking Tahoe. Would you say that, or do you like a different trim?
I think I agree. I think, like, I know some people aren't big on the really big aggressive grille on it, but I think it kind of works on this. And it's also cool that the Z71, it gets a different front bumper that is a little bit shorter and has a little bit more space near the wheels for better approach angle for off-roading. And I think it looks kind of cool that way too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think actually a guy in my neighborhood appears to have a Tahoe, which I would assume means he must probably work for General Motors. Although, I don't know, is it on sale yet? Or is it like...
I believe it is on sale.
Okay, maybe you just bought one. But you still don't see too many of this like new generation, whereas the last one, especially in Metro Detroit, is like everywhere. I really like the Tahoe. I think it's actually a pretty decent value because you get like, strong underpinnings. Like it's the same one that's in the Yukon and in the Escalade, which obviously, those really are more expensive. So I think it's always been a relatively good value, although not a cheap truck. It's, we were looking at getting a Tahoe a while ago, and we ended up kind of going with a different vehicle just because, geez, this is a lot of money for a Chevy. Granted, it's a very capable, SUV, and that's what the segment demands, but, they're not cheap. Let's put it that way. And I'm actually a little curious too about the interior. You mentioned that it's pretty good. Traditionally, we test drive like a Chevy and we're like, oh, it's interior. It's not great. They got everything else right, but the interior is not great. But, for this one, it sounds like they did get it right. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think they're finally on the right track. I still wouldn't mind seeing like just a little bit more variety of textures and materials, but everything that was there was nice, and it does look pretty good. And I would put it a little bit higher than the Ford Expedition, which basically has the old F-150 interior in it right now, which isn't bad, but it's getting a little older. It's got some more kind of plasticky plastics scattered around the cabin. So I think the Tahoe does take it on interior. And it's so spacious inside the Tahoe, which it's the same case with Expedition. It got bigger with its new generation a couple years ago. But the Tahoe is pretty much as easy to get in and spacious, especially getting into the third row seat was really easy in this Tahoe. There's lots of space between the two bucket seats in the second row. I mean, it was almost minivan easy to get into the back seat.
That's really interesting. Another reason why we didn't get a Tahoe was because of that, like sort of like rear ingress and egress, just that big wheel well. It wasn't easy to get people and dogs and things in and out of it, So that's kind of cool. I think it makes a lot of sense that they're probably moving towards their target market. These are not really off-road trucks, even though they're capable to do that. The most like off-road use they're generally going to get is like you're going camping and you end up going over some soft roads, and you're like whoever's in your family at that point, your dog probably, that's who's going there. Anything else you need probably a minivan and or a Jeep Wrangler. So that's cool. Any other Tahoe thoughts?
Yeah, in regards to off-road stuff like the C71, basically what the off-road parts that come with it. It's got the standard limited slip rear differential, all-terrain tires, skid plates. It's got big red tow hooks on the front. And since this one had air suspension, when you're driving at low speed and four-wheel drive low, you can actually raise it up 2 inches higher than normal ride height for extra ground clearance, which is kind of neat. And then when you're done off-roading and need to get out of the truck or get back into it later, it can drop itself down by 2 inches from regular ride height to make it easy to get in and out. Which I kind of feel like when it does have air suspension, they should get rid of the side steps because they're completely unnecessary, because it can drop itself down for you to get in and out.
That is cool. That's a pretty neat party trick, as we like to say. And I think it's, I mean, I've always really enjoyed the Z71 package on the different Chevys that it's on, especially the Colorado. But it's fun, even if you don't take these things off road. I like that dynamic. I like the, what do they call it on Ford? The FX4 package on like the Ranger. I like that for just bouncing around town, just because it's, a Ranger with that, that feature is cool. I think, it rides better, especially when our roads around here are essentially like off-roading. So cool. That's a Tahoe. I can't wait to drive it.
And actually, one last little thing. Because you mentioned that they are really expensive, and they are. The base price Tahoe is right around $55,000. And the thing is, though, that's almost dead on with Ford Expedition. It's only off by about $500. So it's very competitively priced. And if you go through the range, they're not off by more than like $1,000 or so comparative trim levels.
Do you remember what yours cost as tested?
Yeah, so
I'm going to say 72. That's going to be my guess.
Oh crap! I don't think I have the as tested price on me right now.
All right, so it goes. But
I do know that a base Z71 with no options other than like the Z71 package starts at $60,000. So
okay,
there's at least that. Which again, it's not cheap. I mean, this is money where you're looking. I mean. Well, I guess Land Cruiser probably still costs a little bit more than either of these.
Yeah, Land Cruiser, you get up into the 70s, just even starting. And then I drove one that was like 87, 87, 8, 9, something like that. Land Cruiser's pretty cool, though. So I don't know.
I did see, though, that the Nissan Armada starts at, I think, under $50,000.
Right, but that's like driving a truck from 1994, right? I mean...
No, it's not that old. This newest Armada, it's based on the global market Nissan Patrol.
Okay.
And that was fully redone. I mean, it was a few years ago now, but it's not that old.
Gotcha. I didn't mean literally 94, but it's an older vehicle. Okay. Well, that's cool. That's good to know. All right. I think, I mean, the Tahoe really is an important vehicle. What I think is interesting, you're sort of like the salient point here, is that the interior is a little bit nicer, so you say, than the Expedition, which, we've talked about this on the podcast before. It's like the Expedition's interior compared to, like Lincoln interiors. I mean, there is a difference between Ford and Lincoln, let's put it that way. So, but a lot of people are not looking to think Lincoln, if you will. It's just like maybe not, the look, the brand, the vibe they want for themselves. Whereas I think Ford and Chevy, obviously, natural cross shoppers. And if you get one that has a nicer interior, that could be intriguing. I know I'm intrigued, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I should also point out that, I mean, since this is the first time that it's had independent rear suspension, driving wise, it does ride and handle impressively well. Granted, we've only been able to drive the air suspension one, not the magnetic or steel ones, but it was really nicely planted, and something that GM usually does pretty well, and definitely did so on this truck, is the steering is really good. And you pop it into sport mode, and it actually handles surprisingly well. Like, it's almost kind of fun.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I think of Tahoe, I never think steering. That's not the first thing that comes to mind, right? So, very cool. Okay. What'd you do with this thing?
Mostly tooled around town.
Like what everybody has a Tahoe would do?
Yeah, pretty much. Because we only had this truck for like 24 hours. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to take it anywhere in particular.
Cool. Yeah. Maybe for the next one, we just go to a dealer and get one. I always think it's funny when like the car company was like, this truck's on sale, but we're only going to do it like in the sort of, precise way for the press, but that's okay. It was good. You got to test it. You also got to test the Mil-Spec F-150, which is quite the F-150. Check out these pictures on Autoblog. Pretty crazy. It's a wild truck. Rather than me try and like sum it up, why don't you just tell everybody what this thing is? It's pretty wild.
Yeah, so first off, introducing Mil-Spec as a company, they got started doing like resto mod, like serious resto mod, like a lot of changes to Hummer H1s for people. And we've actually test driven one of their H1s before. It's a very impressive vehicle. But now they're expanding to do these upgraded Ford F-150s that you'll be able to buy through dealers, kind of like you can buy a Shelby F-150 or a Roush F-150 or something along those lines. And the one that we drove, it's big. It's so big. It looks a lot like an SVT Raptor at first glance, but it has much wider fenders, and those much wider fenders house much bigger 37-inch off-road tires. And I mean, it's so big. I know I'm kind of belaboring the point here, but it's really big. I think they said it's like 7 inches wider than a regular Raptor. And it's fairly close to being as wide as their H1, as their modified H1s. Now, besides it's,
okay. This is sinking in as I'm looking at these pictures here.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of practice to get used to driving it on the road. When I first got into it, I was checking my mirrors a lot to make sure I wasn't creeping over the lines. But besides,
did you parallel park in this thing? That'd be my other question.
Absolutely not.
Right.
And especially, like, it's got steel off-road bumpers front and rear, so I mean, I wouldn't have damaged it, but I could have done some serious damage to anything that I may have bumped into.
Nice.
But yeah, so besides the giant tires and the giant fenders, I'm looking at the specs, and yeah, it's 13.5 inches wider than a regular F-150 and 7.2 inches wider than a Raptor.
Wow.
But yeah, so it's fitted with Fox racing shocks, front and rear, with long travel upper and lower control arms. Apparently it has about 11 inches of wheel travel up front, 12 inches in the back. And they're only offering this package with the V8 models. That was something that they wanted to do to kind of differentiate the truck from a regular Raptor. That this one, it's got a big burly V8. It's got that V8 noise. They also wanted to do the V8 to maintain towing capacity as well. And they fitted, I think they said it was a Borla catback exhaust. And they fitted their own exhaust tips because they wanted to make sure they could tuck them up, kind of up into where their steel bumper is to improve departure angle at the back. And it's got a custom mesh grille with the Raptor style LED amber lights up front, which I'm guessing that considering how wide it is and how tall it is, that may almost be required to have those extra marker lights to indicate its width. And yeah, so I drove it around for a couple of days, and it's surprisingly civilized. Like, the exhaust was one of the things I was a little bit worried about, because when they fired it up, brought it out to me, it was loud, like really, really loud, like car alarm starting loud. But I discovered that as you're driving it around, as long as you're keeping the revs low, and especially like when you're cruising, it's really, really quiet. It's only when you really get on the gas that it gets really loud, which, I mean, that's a good thing. It means that you can actually drive it around and it's not going to wear you out on a highway drive. Steering still felt fairly good, which is kind of surprising considering the off-road tires. Ride quality was pretty solid. I mean, it was mostly just the giant size that was a little bit stressful.
Little bit stressful, I think, sometimes when you drive like a vehicle that, I mean, I assume you can probably still see around you, if you will, but like, I mean, sometimes even just driving like a bigger heavy duty truck, which are still, not that much bigger than like a full size truck. It's just that sort of like slight nervousness, you're like, whoa, that mailbox is a little closer than I thought. Or, oh, hey, there's a street pole there when you're going through the parking lot of somewhere. It's a little tricky, I get it. Did they tell you at all how many people are like interested in buying these things?
No, I don't have that yet, but I'm guessing they're planning on selling a pretty decent number of them if they're going to be offering the package through dealerships. And it basically comes down to like they'll do this conversion to basically any four-wheel drive V8 F-150. They recommend going with one that has the locking rear differential if it comes with that standard, because they leave the standard rear axle. And one of the things that I was impressed with was that for as huge and kind of outrageous as it is, like numbers wise, I do appreciate that it's not that over the top style wise. I mean, yes, it's very wide and it has some
You mean
stickers.
aside from the enormous fenders and wheel wells?
But aside from that, I mean, it doesn't have like garish chrome wheels. It has like nice, simple, very kind of function driven looking wheels. They're not actually like bead lockers or anything, but like they're not flashy chrome bro wheels. And the interior, basically they just do a catskin leather interior, and they get these nice little aluminum caps that go over the various knobs on the inside, and that's about it. And so it's just like, it's a nice upgrade, but it's not over the top and shouty. And so, I mean, you're mostly paying for like some performance upgrades and the big fenders and tires. And I mean, it can be relatively modest. And by that, I mean, like, if you look at some of the stuff that Shelby puts out, those are kind of ridiculous.
It's what I kind of like. This is a dealer option. I always think that's kind of neat when you can sort of, depending on the dealer you're at, get that sort of aftermarket, but it still has like, I mean, it's a little more reassuring sometimes, like to get something like that at least nominally feels like there's factory support for it. So that's always cool.
And like any performance parts that they've added, because they added different throttle body and cold air intake to the engine, and they're Ford performance parts, so those are covered via warranty. And they're also going to offer a supercharged version that will use the Ford Performance Supercharger kit. So again, it'll be a Ford-backed performance upgrade. And I think if you have the money, I think the supercharged version would be worth getting, because with those giant heavy tires that also effectively make the gear ratio taller, you definitely want extra power, because it didn't feel very quick. So like you'd tromp on the throttle, lots and lots of noise, but not super quick off the line. And
Very
also, cool. That supercharged one, they'll also offer upgraded brakes, which I think will be another really nice thing, because in addition to big, giant, heavy tires making it a little slower off the line, also means that you're using quite a bit of pedal pressure to get it to slow down.
That is wild. Maybe you mentioned this, did you do anything in this that would like be fitting of a truck of this sort of stature? Or, I mean, I don't know, I assume you didn't go to Baja in the day or two you had this. Like, what'd you do with this thing?
Again, it was mostly kind of cruising around town, because we only had it for 2 days. Yeah. And it was at the same time as the Tahoe, so I had to fit in the Tahoe also.
What your neighbors must have thought, like when you've got like two like, pretty wild trucks like that. That's pretty cool. Although I will say this, last week I had the G90, the Genesis, the big sedan, and I had the McLaren GT. So it was like literally my house looked like, what is going on there? And at one point I always kept the McLaren in the driveway, but sometimes just the Genesis, you have to move it onto the street, and it's like not a cheap car to just be street parking. So One of these sort of fun elements of working from home is the drop-offs are all at our house now. So, you know, the neighbors get to watch how the sausage is made, I guess. And somebody always asks me when I get like, I had the NSX, now I have the McLaren, or had the McLaren. People always want to know what's going on there, man. And sometimes I'll just kind of ignore them. I'll be like, no, I'm going to keep cutting the grass, or yeah, my dog is barking at you. Keep walking. It's okay, you know.
Yeah,
but I always like to talk cars.
Yeah, most of my neighbors know what I do, so
yeah,
they understand what's going on when there are crazy cars parked in the driveway.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm super jealous you got to drive both of those. The Tahoe is one. There's something about driving those big body on frame, just SUVs that I find intriguing like that. You know, whether they're old, whether they're brand new like this. So I just think that's cool. And then the Mil-Spec F-150. Hell yeah, man. It sounds like a riot. So why don't we talk some news? Lots of stuff going on this week in the car world. Trofeo for all is what I wrote here on the run sheet. Kind of a funny way of just noting, if you will, that the Maserati has sort of updated its line with 580 horsepower V8s that are going to go basically across the lineup. This is twin turbo. This is 3.8 liters. This is the, you know, I almost feel like we should play this when Maserati says this, play the drinking game that is. It's a Ferrari V8, but sort of almost all of their engines, I believe, are Ferraris. So, yeah, I don't know. That was cool a few years ago. It's still cool, but it's like, okay, when basically somebody else makes all your engines, I don't know. It's kind of a funny
yeah,
thing.
But it's not like Chevy is making those engines,
right? Well, or okay, a Toyota V6.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
no, you're right. You're right. And I'm almost saying that tongue in cheek too. But yeah, I think this is cool. I think it's cool, frankly, anytime we get to write about Maserati, if you will, because they're at times below the radar. This is the Ghibli, and this is actually the first time that smaller sedan, I believe that's the smallest car they make, is going to get this big V8, so that's pretty sweet. I imagine that's going to be a riot to drive. The Levante Trofeo is just updated. I actually drove that a couple years ago at Pebble Beach, and then, of course, the Quattroporte Trofeo. So, you know, it's cool. They're powerful. They're fast. So it goes. You know, there's already like, you know, the Quattroporte, and I'm pulling this from Zach Palmer's story. He's our road test editor. The Quattroporte has a GTS trim. So, you know, this engine in different versions is already kind of out there, but I don't know. It's a reason to talk Italian cars. I think this is cool.
I mean, I kind of feel like it's about time that Maserati did something like this. I mean, they're known as being like a high performance luxury brand. And for the longest time, they haven't really, I mean, they've had fast luxury sedans, but nothing that really like says, hey, we're really actually taking on M and AMG and those guys. And finally, they're actually doing something like that, especially for the Ghibli. I don't know. It's been hard to think of any reason to buy a Ghibli, especially when, I don't know, you could go buy an Alpha. I mean, the Giulia is right there, and it's really, really good, and I think it maybe looks better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do feel like Alphas, which ironically, not all of them, but they generally are a little more affordable than Maseratis, which is sort of the hierarchy when, you know, Fiat Chrysler was trying to manage all of its brands into neat little like segments. Yeah, I often would be like, the Alphas seem more passionate, whereas the Maseratis almost felt like this more like, you know, mundane thing. It was sort of like what I would almost compare to like Chrysler has tried to make the Chrysler brand at time luxurious, which is fine. And I still really like the 300. It's a great car, even though it's like really old. But at times I feel like that's made the cars a little mundane. And then you go over to Dodge and you're like, oh, wow, you could get this amazing, you know, thing. The interior is not as good, but it's got a 392 in it and it looks pretty awesome. So I don't know, the sort of the sibling rivalries here within, you know, the soon to be Stellantis line are interesting. That's for sure.
Well, especially if you're going for like, you want a fast Italian sedan, you buy the Giulia Quadrifoglio. You don't even think about the Maserati Ghibli because the Giulia has crazy Ferrari built twin turbo V6 and amazing handling, and it's an Alpha. And it's like, that seems like a problem for Maserati. So I'm hoping that having like this crazy V8 powered Ghibli will kind of change some of that and be like, oh, this is a really unique little Italian sports sedan.
Yeah, no, very cool. And I think, to me, a Ghibli Trofeo, that's exciting. Like, I would love to get that thing through the fleet and spend a good amount of time in it. And that's where, Maseratis do have that, like, a Maserati is like, you don't necessarily mention it in the same breath as Ferrari, but like if you took a really deep breath, it's like Maserati and Ferrari. That's not totally crazy. As far as ultra luxury, Alpha does, like, we can all remember some of the lower market Alphas. Maserati is clearly a more luxurious Italian car than Alpha is in most respects. So,
And I also think that this is a good thing for Maserati also, just to kind of get some brand awareness again, because I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten a little bit about Maserati and the cars that they offer, but also I think there's a reason for that. And I think it's because the Quattroporte and the Ghibli haven't really changed in years. Like, they're old cars, and even when they came out, they were only just barely competitive with the luxury car set that was out then, and basically every competitor has been redesigned since then. So Maserati really needed something to kind of be like, hey, look at us, we're doing something again.
100%. I agree with that totally. I think, they face some challenges in that segment. So it's kind of like, you got to find a way to like get your brand out there. And it's interesting. You might have been at this. This was a New York Auto Show maybe 3 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer, like 2016 or something. And basically, the premise of the Maserati press conference was, hey, we're Maserati. We're still here. And like they had all of their like history on the walls of it was the Javits Center. The brand was up there, all the great drivers. And it was kind of funny too, because the CEO sort of was like, yeah, we'll admit a lot of this history kind of stopped around like 1960 something. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is from, the 50s or before. It's like a really great history, but it's really historical, if you will. So, they're definitely a brand I would hate to see go away, because it's, as a car enthusiast, you certainly want to see great brands like Maserati out there as an option. They may not be the best option. Like, I would have a hard time recommending a Maserati or an Alpha over some of their counterparts at Mercedes or BMW or Cadillac or Lexus even, but they are the right car for some people. Like a Ghibli with that V8 could be, a Giulia could be, that could definitely be the right car that maybe the infotainment's not as good or the interior's not as good. But the way that car looks, you're like, hey, I'll take the Giulia. So,
I don't know. I don't know that I would really shed many tears if Maserati went belly up. They haven't done anything particularly exciting, like since the Gran Turismo was like last redesigned, and that was, gosh, was that like 10 years ago that came out? And yeah. And everything since then has just kind of been okay-ish. And they've had kind of a mixed history, not counting their motorsports heritage from like the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Well, we'll agree to disagree on that one. But the other thing too is they are a relatively small brand. It's sort of like if they went away, the idea of them going away, like I can totally see what you're saying. The idea of them going away, no. But in practicality, it's like 3 cars, where is that supercar, whatever they have that we keep hearing, but never seems to happen. It's got a fancy name. It was a concept car at Geneva,
we know that
years ago.
They've got their like Maserati designed V6 sports car that's coming up. And like, we have seen some camouflage teaser photos, so we know it exists, and we should see it probably in the next year or so. I am interested to see what that'll be like, because when Maserati does do a sports car, it is usually pretty impressive when it first comes out. I mean, when the Gran Turismo came out, that was just such a gorgeous, gorgeous Grand Tourer. It's still really pretty. It's just really old at this point. So, I mean, when Maserati does finally do a sports car, they do a pretty nice one. So, well, at least I hope they survive for this like next sports car, if nothing else.
So I've converted you, at least long enough to see if their next sports car is any good.
Right.
All right, let's move on to yet another brand that's arriving in the marketplace. This is the Ionic. I like to call it the Ioniq, like it's 1920s cruise ship, but I don't think it is, or ocean liner back then. But this is cool. Hyundai is sort of splintering off Ionic into its own EV brand. I'm sure John Snyder right now, his ears are burning. He's probably like, this is a great thing, and we'll do a green podcast coming up. But I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about this move. I think the name is actually great. I really do. Like, it's tough to get the names right these days, just in general on cars, because frankly, a lot of good names have been used. They've been doing this for 100 years, you know? There's not that many great ones out there, and this is cool. And I think it fits with the idea of an EV, and I think it also, like, Genesis is pretty good for luxury cars, but it takes a while for these brands to gain traction. So, but part of me feels like maybe EV buyers might be more open to just a brand new brand, if you will. Wow, brand new brand. That didn't come out right. But they'd be more open to that notion and just judge the car based on its green credibility versus luxury buyers across the segment want it because it's expensive and because of the name. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting move. I do think it's interesting that they're following almost the exact same playbook as they did for the Genesis rollout, where they introduce a Hyundai car that's called Ionic or Genesis, and they produce that for a little while, and then they're like, okay, we're going to spin off this model as an entire brand. And I don't know if that worked that great for Genesis, but it might be that it's harder to move up market than it is to kind of move laterally. And also, like, luxury car buyers, they're really brand snobs in a lot of the time. Whereas I think you have a point that, like, electric car buyers, I think a lot of them are like, I want to get something new. I don't want to just buy a Chevy or a Ford or a Honda or Toyota. I want to buy this unique, special, forward-looking electric car. I don't want to buy something from a legacy automaker. I want something new and fresh. And so I think this may actually work out better than the Genesis rollout did.
I agree with that. I think it actually has to work out better too than the Genesis rollout did, because otherwise the downside of this is now Hyundai has 1, 2, 3 brands essentially within sort of the Hyundai motor like family, if you will, not counting Kia, which when you look at the overall like corporate hierarchy, that's a lot of brands. You know, suddenly they're becoming General Motors from the 1980s, and it's like, it's a lot of mouths to feed. You know, it gets hard to support all of these brands, particularly with the marketing budget, which is where you really need to build up your brand. We should be doing shots here every time I say the word brand. But so I agree with that. And I also think, you know, again, like I said before, and I think like what you just said, green is probably the way to go.
Yeah. And I don't know if it'll be too difficult for them to handle it, because, I mean, just with Hyundai and Kia, when I've talked to people from those companies, they work surprisingly independently. Like they don't always know exactly what the other brand is working on. I mean, it's a weird thing where like they do work together, like they share platforms and things, but also they do a lot of stuff independently of each other. It's kind of it's a weird thing, but
they're very competitive too. I've been to the headquarters in Korea, and if I remember right, there's like 2 buildings, like it's office towers or something, and like you don't like, you know, go between them, you know, if you work for Hyundai or Kia or something. And yeah, I think I drove an earlier Genesis back in 13 or 14. As I'm thinking back, I drove it on their proving grounds. But yeah, that's a great point. They are separate.
Yeah, and I think probably like the main thing that they know that they need to do better about is their dealership rollout, because that's what really harmed Genesis at first, because Hyundai was like, no, we want Genesis dealers to be completely separate from Hyundai dealers, and that made existing dealers really mad because they couldn't just sell the new cars out of their own existing dealerships, and that was a whole mess, and that kept cars from getting out onto dealer lots early. And the other thing is, I think Ioniq is not going to be sitting as high as Genesis, so it's probably something they can easily integrate into existing dealers. As like, I mean, this is the Hyundai side of the dealership. This is the Ioniq side of the dealership. That shouldn't be too big of a deal. That shouldn't be too big of an issue.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think too, if you're going into a Hyundai dealership and all of a sudden there's this like $70,000 sedan, you're going to be like, what's this? Whereas, and on the opposite side of that, it's going to be hard to get somebody looking for a expensive sedan who may be cross-shopping it with an E-Class or something to go into said Hyundai dealership. But if you're just in there and you're like, oh, hey, here's our green car brand. Okay, well, that's cool. Let's check it out. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, you read this random targeted Facebook ad or something. You're like, Ioniq, here's the dealer. And then you go in there and it's a Hyundai dealer. You're like, okay, there's a sign out front. All right, not a big deal. So I think it could work. I'm no marketer, though.
Yeah. The other thing I'm excited about this, though, is that Ioniq is getting the cool electric concepts that Hyundai has shown the last couple of years. The first vehicle is going to be a slightly crossover-ified version of the Hyundai 45 EV that was shown. Was that a year or 2 years ago? But basically, this like sort of retro style hatchback, like lots of straight horizontal lines, very, very clean, like almost a little bit 70s concept car vibe to it.
Yeah, people love that. I remember we had discussions about that on Slack. It was pretty sweet looking.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. And so that'll be their very first car. And I mean, I'm hoping it's not too expensive because I'd be very interested in that. And that will be coming out, let's see, I need to double check this. I think it's next year it's coming out.
2021 is what I'm seeing, early 2021.
Yeah, so that's something I'm super excited about. And then after that is going to be the production version of the Hyundai Prophecy concept. And that thing was just amazing. That super low, sleek, rounded black sedan that Hyundai brought out, I think just this year, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I'm mixing up, I mean, this whole year I'm like totally blurry on what happened when, but
yeah.
Sure, I buy that.
Yeah, it was... Yeah, our story for the Prophecy came out on March 3rd, so like just before the world shut down.
And it's the perfect time where it would have been immediately brainwashed out of your head, right? You know?
Or, I mean, the last cool concept that we saw for like months.
Could be. Yeah, it's true. That's very true.
Because looking back at it, like, I just love it. Like, there's almost something like Porsche-like about the way it looks. Just like very low, very organic and rounded and simple. I really, really like it. And then, so that'll come out in 2022. And then after both of those come out will be a crossover that we have not seen yet. They tease it a little bit in their brand announcement, but we can't see a whole lot. It looks like it'll probably be kind of boxy and truck-like, though, which seems to be the popular style nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's a good, clean look. Yeah, I mean, this to me seems way more promising than Genesis. Just the whole execution of that, and I don't know if the world frankly needs more green car brands. I'm not sure we need more luxury brands. So I mean, this might be the better bet, the better play. I'm far more excited about it than really anything Genesis ever did, and that's not to say it's bad. It was just kind of like, okay, it's another really good luxury car, you know. The GV line, if you will, of their SUVs are, I think, very attractive, a little over the top. But, I mean, again, I don't think that's going to solve, you know, the world's problems. Actually, another green car might. So,
yeah, and that's, I think, another thing that Ioniq has going for them is that there still isn't much competition in kind of the sub-Tesla area of electric cars. Heck, even in Tesla's competition, there's not that much out yet. There's starting to be some, but not that much. So there just isn't a lot of existing competition to deal with. Whereas Genesis has to deal with a lot of luxury brands with a lot of different models, a lot of history, and really good vehicles. And Genesis has great vehicles. Like they're excellent, but it's hard to get it's hard to get luxury buyers to convert to something all new.
Sounds good. Speaking of Hyundai brands, the Elantra N-Line. This went on site last week. If you're listening to this over the weekend, tell us a little bit about this, Joel.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. Like just a couple days ago, we learned that the Hyundai Elantra GT hatchback is done for the US, which also means that the turbocharged manual transmission inline version is going away too. But now we're going to get a Hyundai Elantra N-Line. And it sort of combines the outgoing Elantra sports sedan and the Elantra GT N-Line into one vehicle. It uses the new kind of crisp, faceted shape of the new Elantra with the very familiar turbocharged 1.6 liter four-cylinder from the Veloster Turbo and the GT N-Line. It makes 195 pound-feet of torque and 200 horsepower. And it can come with either 6-speed manual or 7-speed dual-clutch automatic. And I think it looks really good. I really like it. It looks way better than the old Elantra, which looked a little, I don't know, kind of like stubby and bubbly, whereas this looks much more, it's got a little more length to it and looks a little bit more elegant, and it's got much more interesting surfaces on it.
Yeah, I think I've always been impressed with the Elantra. I think it's a good value, and I think it's entirely logical to try to play in the space, give it some of this like performance juice. I think the Elantra has always been, I think, really an anchor of Hyundai's lineup. It's a great sort of almost like a surprise and delight. Like you get in there, you cross shop with some of the other competitors, and then you get inside the Elantra and you're like, oh wow, look at all this stuff you get. Look at how good the interior is. Okay, literally I remember one of the first times I got in a Hyundai Elantra, which is kind of a funny thing to say, but I was just blown away by how good it was. So I think it's a really good move to add, this treatment and, try to broaden the appeal of it a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they're still going to be committed to offering kind of an affordable performance car.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll still have the Hyundai Veloster Turbo alongside this, but it's always nice to have options. And while they haven't announced pricing, it should still be about like $24,000 like the outgoing versions. So pretty affordable, 200 horsepower, sportier suspension. It gets a multi-link rear suspension instead of the torsion beam rear end of the regular Elantra version. So it should handle quite a bit better.
Sounds good to me. Let's go to the Auto Journalist special. We have the BMW 3 Series Wagon touring. This is cool.
The M3.
Yeah, I skipped the most important part there. Teaser is out. This is cool. I'm psyched. I have always liked things like this, but Joel, I imagine you are pretty fired up.
I am. I mean, in moderation, because the thing is that we're probably not going to get this. Because the regular 3 Series wagon was discontinued with this generation, at least in the United States. And so if they were to bring it here, they would have to go through an entire certification process for a niche car of a niche car. Because like the M3 and M4 are going to sell in much less volume than a regular 3 Series. And then a wagon version of that would sell for an even smaller section of that small section.
I agree with you, but I wish they'd do it.
Yeah, I do too. And especially because like luxury car makers are kind of doing some of this now. Like Audi is bringing out the RS6 Avant to the United States. Granted, they're also going to offer a non-RS version of it, the A6 Allroad, to kind of help cover the costs of homologating it for the US.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this actually, when I look at like the wagon version and just like the vibe and like sort of the utility of the 3 Series, but also the sportiness, to me, that's a pure like BMW vibe as opposed to all the things they're doing with like the 4 Series, the 2 Series, on up and down the line. I still don't like all the different like odd and even numbers. Their lineup confuses me at this point, and I think it confuses a lot of people. But yeah, man, it'd be great if they could bring this here. I think it would. And it doesn't even fit into their current lineup, to your point. Like, there's nowhere they'd really explain this to the general public in light of sort of their nomenclature. But it's cool. I would love to see them do it. And I think, you know, luckily for all those people in Europe, we get to like, you know, ride around skis and surfboards and stuff.
Yeah, and I will admit, looking at the teaser, although it doesn't show much, it does show enough that I think it is going to look really good. It looks like it's got really beefed up rear fenders that are going to make it look really muscular and mean. So I think it is going to look cool. It is a bummer it's not coming here, but also I 100% understand why it's probably not going to come here. It would be extremely expensive, and they probably wouldn't sell many of them.
I did go to the M Division headquarters once in Germany. It was about as cool as you would think. It was one of those like all day like BMW press trips where they do like everything. But I remember how exhausted I was. And I think that was the time I got to go to the BMW museum. So, God, that was a cool trip. That's the kind of thing that you look back on it and you're like, whew, like their work trips and their work when you're doing them, especially when you're jet lagged and like, you know, you got like a crazy deadline. But man, you know, if I could go back and go to like M headquarters and go back to that museum and all the other things we got to do in Germany, I think it might have been the launch of like the 3 Series back. This is quite a while ago, like not this generation, but like a generation ago. Cool trip, man. So yeah. All right, so that's it for news. And that's it for my musings, I guess, of press trips of yore. No spend my money this week, but if you're listening to this, it is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which is kind of cool. You know, that's coming up on the, I believe, the 18th of August. And I think what's kind of cool about this is it's one of the amendments to the Constitution that really actually involved the automobile. You know, we've done different segments here on the podcast. This is just kind of a quick historical note, something I came across in some research. A place that sort of had a nice little online presentation for it was the Frick Museum in Pittsburgh, which I had never heard of actually, but they've got a nice little page. It's almost like an online exhibit. It looks like if they had been open, it would have been, or this is a past exhibit, excuse me. But, and if the museum was open, obviously you could probably still see some of this. But really interesting piece of research. And I don't know, I find it interesting when the car intersects with like major events in history. And, you know, there were a variety of ways the car was used. There was a publicity tool. You know, some of the colors of the cars matched the colors of the movement. Like I think yellow was one of them. It was used to mobilize people. It was used, obviously, you know, during the war effort for World War I, which was just sort of wrapping up at that point. So, you know, it's just, I find this really kind of cool as you look back 100 years ago. So many things are going on right now 100 years ago, like the Spanish flu, unfortunately, also was a thing. And as we look at our coverage, you know, it kind of dawned on me like, wow, this really, you know, was an amendment that really was impacted by the fact that people could get out, people could, you know, rally, they could mobilize, and, you know, it began so many different and, you know, cool things, you know, obviously for this, but also just, you know, the way, of course, you know, the car, you know, transformed society. And this, I think, was a very cool way. Obviously, you know, it was long overdue at that point. And, you know, when you see things like what, you know, the automobile and the role it's played in society, you know, the way it, you know, mass production, you know, essentially brought the middle class to a whole bunch of different, you know, people. It created the middle class. You know, when I was just doing some research, just on the amendment, it wasn't about cars. I was just kind of trying to learn more about it. I was like, oh, this is cool. You know, I came across the Frick Museum and, you know, to me, it was just kind of like one of those aha moments. Like, oh yeah, the car really, it's not just a thing. You know, we talk about cars as like appliances. It really is like something that, you know, transcends, you know, society. So that's my little monologue, if you will. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Joel, but that's, you know, kind of where I left it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the cars made a big impression on the world. actually remember in college. I had a class about the automobile and society, and I mean, one of the things that comes to mind immediately is that it kind of changed dating a lot for people, because you could suddenly go and meet people from other communities, and you had kind of this mobile private space that you could get away from like your parents or your significant other's parents, and go see things and spend time with each other. But yeah, it's amazing how the cars had an impact on the world.
Cool.
Some good ways, like 19th Amendment and things like that, and some bad ways, and urban sprawl and suburbia and stuff.
Yeah, naturally. But it's, it's definitely, I think it's really an interesting footnote to history. When you look at the way, like 100 years ago, cars were really just like coming into their own, if you will. And like, this is an amendment that really had a huge impact on it. I mean, another one was, prohibition, which happened around that time too. And obviously not really as, relative to cars, but so that's 100 years back, a little historical footnote there. And that's it. That's it for that segment. And that's it for this show. What's in your driveway now, Joel?
So right now I've got a Mercedes AMG CLA 35.
Okay. Very cool. That sounds fun. I have a Toyota CHR. This was supposed to have been a Scion, if I recall. So,
yeah,
hey, that's cool with me.
I think it would have made a good Scion, honestly.
It would have made a good Scion, yeah. And I had a 86 a couple weeks ago, which was a Scion, if you will, in FRS badging. So that's it. We're out of time this week for the Autoblog Podcast. Thanks for listening. Be safe out there. Send us your spend my monies and enjoy the rest of summer. We'll see you on the other side.